It's Kyle here, and today I'll be exploring some of my favorite biographies. But before I get started on my list, just as a reminder, if you enjoy this video, please hit that like button. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I appreciate the support. On to the books I want to feature today. Now, I'm not saying these are my favorite biographies of all time. These are some of my favorites. But I wanted to highlight some biographies on here that I haven't really touched on in previous videos, or if it has, it's been a long time since I've touched on these books. This is a way to kind of spotlight some books that I've really enjoyed on this channel that maybe I just haven't mentioned before, to kind of help get the word out about some great books. So that being said, let me just get to them. These are in no particular order. First up is Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. Like a lot of people into history, you're familiar with the Mongolian Empire and Genghis Khan, and then all his successors, Kublai Khan, stuff like that. But I never really knew a whole lot of the details about his life, other than he basically created the largest empire in the history of the world, unmatched military success, died and kind of halted the Mongolian expansion for a while. But I didn't really know much details about him. So I remember one time I was at a bookstore and I was looking for some nonfiction books, and I saw this book and I was like, I want to get this book. I want to learn a little bit more about him. Now, there is some stuff this book touches on that a lot of his life is shrouded in myth. So it's kind of hard to sometimes actually figure out what actually happened and what are myths that were actually built up around him, either some actually during his own life and some after within the Mongolian people. But it kind of presents them and kind of gives theories which one are more likely, but presents all the ones that are reasonable, and it gives you a good background of what he was like as a kid, how he rose to power, how he united the Mongolian tribes, and what made him such a successful military leader. Just elements of his personality. It was a very interesting read, and for I think a figure in world history that a lot of people in America are just not really familiar with beyond just the basic stuff. I would really recommend reading a book about him. So this one I really enjoyed. The good thing too is also kind of a short read. So sometimes biographies are these huge, 1,000-page books. I think that sometimes that scares people off. This book is just about 250, 260 pages. So a very quick read, but still very, very interesting. So I definitely recommend it. Next up is Warriors of God, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin in the Third Crusade by James Reston Jr. This book has actually an interesting history of how it got to me. So my sister has always been very fascinated by the English history. I think part of it's because her she's always been fascinated by Shakespeare, so a lot of his plays and works obviously revolve around figures in English history, especially a lot of the monarchs, and I got her really into that. And she became very interested in Arthurian legends, legends of Robin Hood. So one year when I was looking for, I can't remember if this was for Christmas or her birthday, but I saw this book. I knew Richard the Lionheart was one of her favorite figures in English history, so I decided to get this book for her. She really enjoyed it, but she's not like me. She doesn't necessarily like to keep all her books. So she kind of holds on to stuff for a year or two in case she wants to reread it, and then as she gets a new book, she just kind of clears it, because she kind of just keeps one little bookshelf. And so when it was, a lot of times what she'll do when she's getting rid of books, she'll say hey Kyle, here's the 10 or 15 books I'm kind of clearing out to make more room on bookshelves. Let me know if you want one of these, otherwise I'll donate them to the library for their friends at the library book sale. And I remember when I got this book, I thought, this sounds very interesting, and I want to borrow it from her sometime. So when she was deciding to give it away, I'll take it and read it, and I'm really glad I did. So this is a little bit different from the other books that I'm covering, because this is kind of a biography that touches on two individuals. Richard the Lionheart, which is famous for being in a lot of the Robin Hood movies, is what probably most people know Richard the Lionheart for. And then Saladin, one of the more important figures in Middle Eastern history that basically a lot of people have just never heard of, but basically he's probably best known for taking Jerusalem back from the Crusaders. So this is kind of a biography, but kind of specifically about Richard the Lionheart and Saladin matching up. Richard the Lionheart maybe arguably one of the best military leaders in English and European history, matching up against Saladin, one of the most successful and best military leaders in Middle Eastern history. And it's kind of catching both these armies at their peak and kind of squaring off. And it's a very fascinating picture. The author does an amazing job of exploring both the leaders' backgrounds. I know sometimes when I've read books like this where it's kind of focusing on two opposing sides, it's very easy for the author to fall into giving more attention to one character. Sometimes just because that individual is just maybe more interesting and more charismatic, or maybe there's clearly a good guy and bad guy in the story. But in this case, the author does a great job of presenting, like, here's the positives of both these individuals, here's the negative parts of their personality, here's why this one succeeded in this case, this is why he failed, this is, and same true for both of them. Basically, how these two figures came into conflict is basically after Saladin did reconquer Jerusalem, Richard the Lionheart helped raise the next crusade to try to then reconquer Jerusalem from Saladin, and it's basically their armies facing off during this crusade. It is absolutely a fascinating book. The title is very appropriate, Warriors of God, because both viewed themselves that way. Richard the Lionheart as a warrior of God for Christianity, Saladin a warrior of God for Islam. And it also does a lot to kind of explore those two religions and why they came into conflict over Jerusalem. So really, really recommend this book. It's a very fascinating read. Probably the ones I'm highlighting today, probably my favorite. Next up is a very different type of biography. That's Johnny Cash's Life by Robert Hilburn. Johnny Cash is one of my favorite musicians of all time. Absolutely loved him. A few years ago, I was actually in Nashville for work and had some free time. When I did, I went into a record store. I was more just looking around. I wasn't really planning on buying anything. And the record store happened to have a little, very small, but a decent number of books, mainly biographies on very prominent country musicians. And I saw this one there. And I've always been a big Johnny Cash fan, but I've never really known a whole lot about his life other than what's in his songs. So I decided to pick this book up, and I'm really glad I did. He has such a fascinating life, and it shapes, and after you read a book like this, how you enjoy his music. So I'd say, one, if you're a music fan, especially if you're a Johnny Cash fan, and you've never read a book about his life, I would definitely recommend this book. But if you're just looking for, maybe you're into music, but you're not really into country music, I would still recommend this book, because one thing this book does a great job of doing is highlighting how important Johnny Cash was to several genres of music, and really became a trailblazer in country, gospel, rock and roll. He really was a huge figure in all those music genres, and really helped shape what modern American music is today. And his life is absolutely fascinating. If you've ever seen the movie Walk the Line, you'll know a lot about it. This book kind of touches on a lot of stuff and even expands it more, so definitely recommend this one. And then the last book I wanted to highlight is probably the least known figure that I'm going to touch on today, and the book is The Catcher Was a Spy, The Mysterious Life of Mo Berg by Nicholas Dawidoff. And I was trying to figure out how to describe this book to you, and I just couldn't come up with a good summary, and I said, I'm just going to read elements off the back cover, because they do a lot better job than I could really do. Why reinvent the wheel? Because it's really hard to explain why Mo Berg is such a fascinating figure, and that you should learn about him. So I'm just going to use the author's own words. Mo Berg is the only Major League Baseball player whose baseball card is on display at the headquarters of the CIA. For Berg was more than a third-string catcher who played on several Major League teams between 1923 and 1939. Educated at Princeton and the Sorbonne, he was reputed to speak a dozen languages, and he went on to become an OSS spy in Europe during World War II. As Nicholas Dawidoff follows Berg from his claustrophobic childhood through his glamorous, though equivocal careers in sports and espionage, into the long nomadic years during which he lived on the hospitality of such scattered acquaintances as Joe DiMaggio and Albert Einstein, he seeks not only establishing where Berg went, but who he was beneath the layers of a carefully constructed cover. So I never really heard of Mo Berg, and I think one day I was actually at the bookstore and I was just randomly browsing stuff. And I saw this title, and I thought, that's an interesting title. I picked up, read the back, and it's one of those books like, I have to read about this. And I'm really glad it, because it's one of those books when you read it, it's like, this can't be real. This has to be like a novel, or, you know, something that was completely fabricated. It's one of those biographies. It says it's biography, but it really is. It is. It's true, and it's very fascinating that, you know, here's this guy. Just think of somebody today that was, you know, a pro athlete, and then, you know, was known while he was an athlete. Oh, he's really smart and stuff like that. But there's athletes like that day, and then he retires, and then 10, 15 years later, you find out, like, oh, you know that real famous baseball player after he retired? Oh, he went into the CIA and, you know, spied in Europe for a decade or so, and then he came back and now he's retired. That's basically what Berg did during, you know, like the World War II and the beginnings of the Cold War. He was this, you know, important spy. But before that, he was a professional athlete, and it's very interesting to kind of read about his life, and even the people that knew him, how much of a mystery he was even to his own close acquaintance. Nobody ever was able to quite figure out who and what Berg was. Like I said, this really reads more like a spy novel that just happens to be a true spy novel. So I definitely recommend The Catcher Was a Spy, because it's one of those books when you read it, again, you just can't believe it's real. And sometimes those are the best nonfiction books, when it's a true event and it shocks you because you just cannot believe it will actually happen. Because, as the saying goes, you know, a lot of times truth is stranger than fiction. So I definitely recommend this one. So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this video on the biographies I highlighted. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to that channel. In the comment section below, please let me know, are there any good biographies that you've read that you would really recommend to me or any other people to get in the comments of this video. Look forward to your suggestions. Again, hope you enjoyed the video. Happy reading, and I'll see you the next time.